In those days, most commoners' homes lacked proper stone chimneys. An open hearth was often situated right in the center of the single room, and acrid smoke constantly hung beneath the low ceiling. People literally breathed thick smoke from morning till night, which led to severe respiratory illnesses. The interior was a harsh living environment that demanded constant vigilance and incredible endurance from every resident. Thatched roofs and damp earthen floors provided the perfect shelter for rodents and insects carrying dangerous infections. Due to the lack of glass in the windows, the rooms were blown through by icy winds during cold winters. Any attempts to seal the cracks tightly with thick wooden shutters only exacerbated the buildup of harmful smoke and dampness inside. Life under such a roof turned into a daily exhausting struggle for survival. Watch the video to the end, and you'll discover which of the most common elements of a home had the greatest destructive power. Are you ready to learn the truth about what was right above the heads of medieval people? The first place in our ranking of hidden dangers goes to the massive thatched roof. This architectural element was constructed from tightly packed layers of dry stalks and thick branches. The structure absorbed a huge amount of moisture during prolonged autumn downpours and long winter snowfalls. The weight of the wet roof increased many times over, creating colossal and constant pressure on the supporting wooden beams. The beams often could not withstand such a monstrous load and began to slowly sag into the interior of the building. The wood gradually weakened under the influence of constant dampness and sharp seasonal temperature fluctuations. The branches and poles that served as the framework for the straw would crack with a deafening sound in the middle of the night. The residents were constantly under the threat of the massive vault suddenly collapsing right onto their heads. Heavy structural elements could collapse into the interior of the single living room at any moment. Old roofs, which had not been maintained by caring hands for many years, posed a particular danger. Over time, the straw lost its water-repellent properties and turned into a dense, wet sponge. Water seeped through the numerous layers, causing the internal support posts of the frame to rot. The wooden pegs and thick leather straps holding the frame together would become waterlogged and quickly lose their original strength. An entire section of the heavy roof could slide down, crushing and destroying everything in its path. The wind constantly blew small particles of dry plants and accumulated earth dust out of the old roof. This fine debris continuously rained down, covering all horizontal surfaces in the house with an even gray layer. Breathing such dirty air was difficult, especially in a closed room without proper ventilation. The constant dust in the air severely irritated the throat and settled in a thick layer on exposed food. Cleaning the dwelling of this continuous stream of debris was an absolutely impossible household task. Replacing rotten, load-bearing beams was an unbearably long and technically complex process for a peasant. It was necessary to find a suitable, straight tree in the forest, cut it down, and dry it properly under a shelter. Wet wood warped during natural drying, twisting the entire complex roof structure. Installing a new support required the complete dismantling of a significant portion of the roof, leaving the house completely exposed. During such work, the residents were left completely defenseless against the vagaries of harsh weather. The very nature of traditional, high-pitched roof architecture has always harbored serious structural flaws. The steep pitch created enormous wind resistance, making the house extremely vulnerable during autumn storms. Old fastenings often could not withstand the constant vibration from strong and sudden gusts of wind. The wooden frame emitted frightening, drawn-out creaks, signaling the extreme internal stress on the materials. Every night storm invariably became a severe test of strength for the entire flimsy building. The thatched roof served not so much as a reliable shelter as a constant source of deep anxiety. It required continuous, labor-intensive maintenance, frequent repairs, and close attention to the slightest changes. Protection from one natural force inevitably made the structure weak and vulnerable to a completely different one. We'd love to hear your perspective, so please share your thoughts on the reliability of such shelters in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on new revelations of historical facts. The secret that large companies are hiding could very well pertain to the construction of a typical medieval floor. In most of the simplest dwellings, ordinary, tightly compacted earth served as a solid foundation. This readily available material seemed reliable, but in practice it harbored many hidden daily dangers. The floor level was often below street level, turning the house into a sort of rainwater collector. Any heavy, prolonged downpour inevitably led to muddy streams of water flowing directly into the living quarters. The damp soil dried slowly, constantly maintaining critically high humidity inside the dark house. The dampness penetrated deep into the wooden parts of the sparse furniture and contributed to the rapid deterioration of the wood. The residents' shoes and undergarments remained constantly damp, causing severe daily discomfort. The floor surface quickly turned into a slippery, sticky mass that was incredibly dangerous to walk on. Falling on such an uneven, hard surface risked serious injuries in the constant semi-darkness. To combat the dirt, the floor was often generously covered with a thick layer of dry reeds or cheap straw. This plant bedding quickly absorbed the stagnant moisture and began to slowly decompose right underfoot. The natural decay process was constantly accompanied by the release of acrid, invisible vapors and heavy, unpleasant odors. Replacing such a dirty covering was extremely rare due to a shortage of fresh, dry materials during the winter. Layers of old straw were heavily compressed, forming a dense crust of earth and rotting food waste. The earthen floor was originally extremely uneven and constantly deformed under the weight of daily foot traffic. In the most frequently traversed areas, deep, slippery ruts and hidden earthen pits quickly formed. In the thick darkness, by the dim, flickering light of a torch, stumbling over such a protrusion was all too easy. The unevenness made it very difficult to place household items steadily, which is why heavy kettles of boiling water often tipped over. A single careless, quick movement could easily lead to a massive spill of hot liquid. Groundwater often rose in the spring, turning the earthen floor into a veritable muddy swamp. Foundation stones, if there were any at all, slowly sank under the prolonged pressure of the eroded soil. The walls began to lean menacingly, losing their original straight lines and structural stability. The house could literally slide down a muddy slope if it was built on uneven, hilly terrain. Living in such a damp space became unbearable due to the constant, oppressive threat of sudden collapse. During dry, hot summers, the earth cracked severely, forming deep, dangerous fissures all around the perimeter. These wide fissures seriously compromised the structural integrity and greatly weakened the building's supporting pillars. Dry winds seeped through the cracks at the base of the walls, creating strong, cold drafts at foot level. It was physically impossible to keep precious heat inside such a sieve of earth. The house was drafty through and through, forcing the unfortunate residents to constantly wrap themselves tightly in thick, coarse fabrics. Storing valuables on the earthen floor led to their inevitable and rapid deterioration from the rising damp. Baskets of provisions were covered with a thick layer of mold within days of close contact with the cold ground. Wooden chests lost their shape and dried out, while the few metal tools were quickly covered with a layer of rust. The lack of a reliable wooden insulating layer made it completely impossible to build up long-term supplies for the long winter. Do you think it was possible to keep a house warm with such an unstable foundation? In the next chapter, you'll learn what invisible threat lurked in the food storage areas. What was found in the old archives completely changes our understanding of medieval food storage methods. Storing food under harsh conditions without modern technology turned into a veritable chemical lottery. Aggressive fermentation and decay processes took place secretly in the dark, damp corners of wooden barrels and clay jugs. Food, meant to sustain life, was quietly turning into a source of serious, invisible danger. Spoiled winter supplies didn't always immediately reveal themselves through a changed appearance or a pungent odor. High humidity and sharp temperature fluctuations created the ideal environment for the growth of toxic molds. Fungi penetrated deep into the grain, contaminating the flour long before it was turned into bread. Consuming such poison-baked goods led to severe disruptions in the functioning of the entire fragile body. Grains infected with dangerous ergot caused severe, irreversible systemic failures and intense hallucinations. Entire peasant families suffered from the grave consequences of eating fresh loaves that appeared perfectly normal on the outside. Heavy salting and prolonged smoking were the primary and only methods for long-term preservation of meat products. However, the slightest imbalance in the salt ratio led to the rapid formation of dangerous toxins deep within the ham. The destructive chemical process took place deep within the meat, leaving the outer surface intact. People would eat such a product, completely unaware of the deadly threat lurking in every bite. An excess of salt, meanwhile, always caused severe internal dehydration and placed a critical strain on the organs. Cheese and fresh dairy products spoiled incredibly quickly at the slightest rise in air temperature. In clay pots, microorganisms began to multiply rapidly, turning wholesome milk into a poisonous, bitter whey. The thin, invisible line between a wholesome fermented milk product and a spoiled mass was erased very quickly. The lack of ice houses forced people to store these fragile products in deep, dark earthen pits. But even there, excessive dampness and heat from the soil inevitably did their quiet, destructive work. Stocks of healthy root vegetables in damp cellars were often exposed to groundwater and rotted quickly. Sweet orange carrots and firm turnips became slippery and covered with a thick layer of whitish mold. The stagnant air and cramped storage spaces quickly filled with heavy gases from decomposing organic matter. Descending into such a deep cellar without first airing it out could easily cause sudden loss of consciousness. The enclosed space of the cellar rapidly turned into a suffocating, slow-acting gas chamber. Rancid old oil was yet another hidden and constant threat in medieval monotonous cuisine. Fats inevitably oxidized under prolonged exposure to oxygen, acquiring a pungent taste and disrupting the digestive system. Using such rancid oil for frying filled the cramped house with suffocating fumes that made the eyes water profusely. Toxic chemical compounds accumulated in the body, slowly and inexorably depleting its internal reserves. Keeping the oil fresh throughout the long winter was a nearly impossible task for the housewife. Drinking water in large wooden barrels would stagnate and become covered with a thick layer of green, swampy slime. The wood constantly released natural tannins, which in high concentrations became harmful to consume. The lack of running clean water forced people to use the same containers for months without thorough, deep cleaning. The sediment at the very bottom of the barrel concentrated all possible harmful impurities and dust from the air. Every sip of such stagnant liquid carried a huge risk of severe stomach upset. Dried fish, stored for future use, was often hopelessly spoiled near the central bone. A thick, hard crust of salt perfectly masked the internal spoilage from the watchful eye of the housewife. Consuming such a suspicious product during the harsh, cold months was a necessary but extremely dangerous measure. There was often simply no alternative, and hungry people had to take a huge risk with their own health. Be sure to like this video if you enjoy learning about the hidden and unusual details of the past. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the design of ordinary medieval wooden windows. Most simple homes lack tight-fitting glass frames capable of reliably keeping heat inside. Window openings were simply square holes in the walls, covered by rough wooden shutters. These heavy shutters never fit tightly against the wall, leaving wide gaps for the biting wind. Icy air penetrated the dwelling unhindered, completely negating the heat from the open hearth. As a cheap alternative to glass, people often used stretched bull bladders or oiled linen cloth. Such makeshift windows let in very little dim daylight and were extremely fragile in the wind. A strong gust could easily tear the thin membrane, instantly cooling the room to the sub-zero temperatures outside. Repairing a torn bladder in the harsh winter was a difficult task due to the acute shortage of elastic materials. The room would be plunged into darkness for a long time, as the opening had to be tightly sealed with spare boards. Constant cold drafts created zones of extreme, icy cold inside the small house. The temperature by the window could be dozens of degrees lower than near a brightly burning fire. Such sharp temperature fluctuations caused severe general hypothermia and pneumonia. Sleeping near an open window was equivalent to spending the night in the open, frosty night air. The headwind blew the remaining warm air straight through the roof, creating a destructive wind tunnel effect. The wooden shutters swelled significantly from the autumn dampness and often jammed tightly in a half-open position. It became physically impossible to close them tightly until the arrival of the dry, warm summer. The gaps between the uneven boards had to be constantly plugged with straw, forest moss, or old rags. These improvised soft seals quickly got wet from the snow and turned into hard, icy plugs. The expanding ice destroyed the wood of the frame, increasing the size of the cracks with each harsh winter. Builders often made window openings very small to minimize the loss of precious winter heat. However, this simple solution turned the dwelling into a dark, stuffy cave filled with stagnant air. The suffocating heavy smoke from the hearth could not escape quickly, slowly poisoning the home's inhabitants. Finding the perfect balance between heat retention and adequate ventilation was architecturally impossible. People were forced to choose daily between slow suffocation from smoke and severe hypothermia. The placement of windows depended entirely on the direction of the prevailing squall, winds in a specific mountainous or flat terrain. A mistake by the builders inevitably led to the house being constantly blown through by storm gusts. It was impossible to correct such a fatal oversight. The opening had to be permanently sealed with heavy stones. The dwelling lost its last source of daylight, becoming completely soundproof and incredibly dark. Such architectural miscalculations came at too high a cost for the fragile health of all the inhabitants. Even very wealthy stone houses with early glass windows did not guarantee complete thermal insulation. The lead frames of beautiful stained glass windows were completely drafty and let in streams of icy air. Real glass was incredibly expensive, and its loss was tantamount to a serious financial disaster. The sound of glass shattering in the wind made the blood run cold in the veins of the wealthy owners of stone mansions. Was it even possible to survive the harsh winter without thick, airtight glass? In the next chapter, you'll learn how ordinary wooden staircases turned into an insurmountable obstacle course. Multi-level wooden houses or spacious buildings with high, functional attics required the use of stairs. In the harsh Middle Ages, these structures were always built without any safety standards or ergonomic considerations. Wooden steps were hewn with crude, heavy tools and often varied greatly in height and width. Climbing such an uneven surface every day required constant, intense concentration and incredible physical dexterity. The lack of reliable handrails made the structure as unstable as possible and extremely dangerous for regular use. The angle of most old indoor staircases was nearly vertical, strongly resembling steep ship's gangways. Descending them usually required facing backward, clinging tightly with one's hands to the rough, unfinished edges of the planks. A single wrong, hasty movement led to a rapid and painful fall onto the hard earthen floor of the lower level. Carrying a heavy load up such an incredibly steep incline was a task requiring acrobatic skills and great strength. Maintaining balance became a daily, exhausting physical ordeal for absolutely all residents. The only material used for the steps was ordinary wood, which over time was polished to a mirror-like shine by the soles of people's shoes. The smooth old wood became incredibly slippery, especially if water or grease happened to get on it. A quick ascent in wet shoes after rain guaranteed a loss of traction and an inevitable sharp fall down. Straw brought in on feet from the street created an additional slippery layer at the very edge of each step. Safe movement depended entirely on the grip of one's toes and incredible luck. The upper edge of the stairs was often secured to the floor joists using the simplest wooden wedges. Under constant exposure to vibrations and fluctuations in humidity, these primitive fastenings gradually loosened and weakened. The entire heavy wooden structure could suddenly detach from the top beam right under a person's full weight. The massive frame would crash down with a thunderous roar, dragging the hapless owner of the multi-story house down with it. Preventing such a catastrophic collapse was incredibly difficult due to hidden defects caused by internal stresses in the wood. Natural wood rot was the main cause of the sudden collapse of individual old stair treads. Dampness rising from the subfloor saturated the stringers, making them completely rotten deep inside. Outwardly, the tread appeared quite sturdy, but under the weight of an adult, it would instantly snap in half. A foot would quickly fall through the gaping hole that formed, leading to severe fractures and serious dislocations. Repairs required completely dismantling the entire flight of stairs, so the broken board was often simply carefully bypassed. The narrow square openings in the ceiling leading to a wooden staircase posed an additional risk of head injury. The height of the attic hatch was rarely designed to accommodate the full height of a tall adult man. When climbing up in a hurry, a person could hit the top of their head hard against a massive crossbeam. A strong blow could cause disorientation and a subsequent fall from a great height onto the lower wooden floor. The architecture of the old house took absolutely no account of the anatomical features and dimensions of the human body. The heavy stepladders used to access the tall external granaries were even more unstable. They were set directly on loose, eroded ground and often tilted to one side under heavy loads. A strong gust of cold wind could topple such a ladder just as a person was at the very top. In winter, the wooden base would freeze over, causing the lower supports to slide severely on the frozen hard ground. Using steep exterior ladders in bad weather was akin to a dangerous game of roulette with the elements. The constant warping of the wood caused the steps to twist and significantly alter their original angle of inclination. A foot would suddenly slip off the warped surface even with the most careful and slow step. The wooden dowels holding the structure together had shrunk and permanently fallen out of their worn-out grooves. The staircase began to creak menacingly and loudly and sway, as if it were an old cart ready to fall apart. Every ascent was accompanied by a cacophony of frightening sounds, testifying to the material's extreme physical wear and tear. The steep wooden staircase in the medieval house was not merely an interior element, but a harsh series of daily obstacles. It demanded constant, extreme vigilance, physical strength, and good coordination of all movements. This architectural element showed absolutely no mercy for the slightest inattention or haste in everyday tasks. Daily life gradually turned into a continuous, exhausting struggle against the laws of gravity and the resistance of old materials. Any floor above the first automatically became a high-risk zone for absolutely every resident. I will reveal the best-kept secret about exactly how the walls of simple medieval dwellings were constructed. Most houses were not built from massive hewn stone, but were constructed using half-timbering or simple wattle and daub techniques. The foundation was a thick wooden frame, the space between which was tightly filled with interwoven branches and generously coated with clay. This old construction method, known as wattle and daub, was incredibly cheap but strikingly fragile and extremely vulnerable. The walls literally crumbled before our eyes under the relentless passage of time and harsh weather conditions. The outer clay coating lacked strength and quickly became covered with deep webs of cracks. Direct sunlight severely dried out the material, causing it to flake off in huge chunks from the woven wooden framework. The exposed, thin framework of branches was completely unable to retain heat or protect against the wind. The house began to be blown through, constantly requiring complex repairs and a new large batch of liquid, sticky clay. This endless, exhausting cycle of patching holes took up a huge amount of precious time and physical strength. Autumn downpours caused irreparable damage to the exterior of the building, washing away the unfired earth in large quantities. Streams of rainwater literally washed away the walls, quickly turning them into muddy puddles at the very base of the house. The wattle branches became thoroughly soaked and began to rot rapidly, completely losing their original load-bearing capacity. The house could become severely deformed and settle under the weight of the roof due to the critical weakening of the wall panels. Water found the slightest hidden crack to seep inside and irreparably ruin the meager belongings. Harsh winter frosts turned the damp clay into brittle ice, physically tearing the structure of the material from the inside. The frozen water expanded significantly, chipping off huge chunks of plaster right in the middle of severe nighttime cold snaps. The exposed sections of the thin wall were instantly covered with frost, cooling the room to the most critical sub-zero temperatures. Winter repairs were impossible, as the new clay froze immediately with no time to set. The dwelling stood half-ruined until late spring, blown through by icy snowstorms. The thin wattle and daub walls absorbed absolutely no sound and provided no insulation from street noise. But their main fundamental flaw was their inability to withstand rough physical impact from the outside. A strong blow with a heavy object could easily pierce a wattle panel right through, destroying part of the fragile house. Large livestock accidentally leaning against the wall from the outside could easily push it inward. The protective function of such a primitive enclosure was more psychological than a real physical barrier. The wooden support frame holding up the mud-walled house was prone to decay from constant, prolonged contact with the damp earth. The thick support posts rotted at the very base, causing the entire old building to lean dangerously. The warping of the frame caused immense stress in the wall panels, which burst with a deafening, dry crack. The house could collapse like a rickety house of cards if the central support finally lost its strength. Could such fragile structures withstand the force of strong winds for decades? In the next chapter, you'll learn why even long-awaited sleep brought no safety or peace. The massive medieval bed was a world away from modern notions of comfortable rest and rejuvenation. In most ordinary homes, a simple wooden box tightly packed with dry straw or stiff hay served as a sleeping place. Over time, this primitive organic mattress became severely compressed, turning into an incredibly hard and lumpy surface. Sleeping on such an uneven surface caused severe back pain and prevented the muscles from relaxing at all. People woke up exhausted and worn out, having received absolutely none of the necessary nighttime rest after hard physical labor. Ordinary straw had the property of strongly absorbing moisture from the surrounding cold air and human night sweat. Over the course of a few cold weeks, the mattress became incredibly heavy, damp, and absolutely icy to the touch. Natural drying of the filling during the winter was impossible, so people slept on a constantly damp, cold surface. The dampness inevitably led to joint ailments and persistent severe colds from prolonged nighttime exposure to the cold. Precious body heat quickly dissipated into the wet straw, leaving a person shivering until the faintest dawn. The organic plant-based filling slowly decomposed inside the enclosed wooden box under the influence of body heat and dampness. Decay processes began at the very center of the dense mattress, constantly accompanied by the release of a musty, very heavy odor. Breathing in these stagnant fumes throughout the long night was extremely harmful to vulnerable lungs. Ventilating the room did not help, since the source of the acrid stench was located directly beneath the sleeping person. Changing the filling frequently was impossible due to strict conservation of valuable supplies for feeding livestock. The dry, fine dust produced in abundance by the friction of the stalks penetrated the coarse linen sheets. Every involuntary movement during sleep stirred up an invisible thick cloud of allergens and fine debris into the air. People inhaled this harmful suspension for hours on end, leading to a constant cough and severe throat irritation. The airways became clogged with dry, fine dust, causing bouts of severe suffocation in the unventilated, closed room. Nighttime sleep gradually turned into a severe ordeal for the respiratory system, wearing it down night after night. Invisible mold spores multiplied incredibly quickly in the warm, damp environment of the rotting straw filling. This hidden threat permeated the mattress, leaving dark, damp, and slippery spots on the coarse fabric. Close skin contact with the affected areas caused severe redness and systemic allergic reactions. Weakened by a poor, monotonous diet, the body could not effectively resist the constant exposure to harmful fungal spores. The bed, meant to protect and provide rest, itself became a source of hidden, relentless destruction of health. The placement of a bulky bed in a cramped room played a critical role in survival during the freezing winter. Placing it near a drafty window or an icy wall meant exposing oneself to piercing drafts. Proximity to an open hearth posed a constant threat of flying sparks capable of igniting dry straw in seconds. Finding a truly safe and warm spot in a small, drafty house was an unsolvable problem. Sleep always teetered on the fine line between hypothermia and the danger of severe burns from the fire. In very wealthy homes, huge down comforters were used, which harbored entirely different dangers. The dense, thick layer of feathers did not allow any air to pass through, creating a hot greenhouse effect for the human body. Excessive heat led to severe overheating, followed by a sudden chill if the blanket was accidentally kicked off. The feathers clumped tightly into hard, lumpy masses, disrupting proper blood circulation during prolonged sleep. Deep cleaning such a massive quilt was an incredibly difficult process, possible only during the warm, dry summer months. The heavy canopy over the bed, designed to retain heat, created a closed, dark space with minimal ventilation. The air inside the canopy quickly became stuffy and oversaturated with carbon dioxide from the sleeper's breathing. The severe lack of oxygen caused severe throbbing headaches and a constant feeling of lethargy in the mornings. The heavy, dense fabric of the canopy collected a huge amount of dust, which slowly fell onto the people. Protection from the biting cold outside turned into a slow but sure oxygen deprivation all night long. The medieval bed demanded tremendous physical endurance from absolutely everyone who tried to find rest on it. It astonishingly combined the cold of dampness, the stuffiness of heavy canopies, and the hardness of wooden frames. Rest was merely a forced shift from one form of physical discomfort to another after a grueling, exhausting day of labor. Every night spent in that bed sapped some of his strength, rather than bringing the expected full recovery in the morning. The bed always remained a place where a person was most vulnerable to the forces of nature within his own crumbling home. Having one's own source of drinking water right in the backyard was considered a tremendous privilege and an incredible rarity. However, in the context of dense medieval urban development, a well often turned into a concentrated, invisible threat. Groundwater inevitably mixed with human waste from the numerous nearby cesspools. The porous earthen soil was completely unable to filter the water, allowing hazardous substances to seep directly into the aquifer. Water that appeared clear and cold could harbor enormous chemical and biological dangers. Over time, the deep wooden well casing became thickly covered with a layer of slippery black mold. The rotting old wood poisoned the water with tannins, giving it a bitter, unpleasant taste and a murky color. The collapse of the rotten lower logs inevitably led to the complete silting up and destruction of this vital source of drinking water. Cleaning the narrow, deep shaft was an extremely dangerous task due to the accumulation of heavy toxic gases at the bottom. A desperate person descending into it ran a high risk of losing consciousness from acute oxygen deprivation in the confined space. Lead and old copper pipes, used in wealthy homes for water supply, posed their own specific threat. Water very slowly dissolved heavy metals, turning into a deadly toxic cocktail with a slow and invisible effect. Daily, regular consumption of such liquid led to the gradual accumulation of toxins in all internal organs. Devastating symptoms developed over many years, manifesting as weakness, pain, and severe disruptions to the nervous system. The luxury of a private water supply system resulted in the invisible destruction of the health of entire generations of affluent urban families. In winter, the primitive water lifting mechanisms froze solid, covered by a thick crust of very hard ice. The heavy wooden bucket and rough rope became incredibly slippery and impossible to lift due to the frozen moisture. The daily task of fetching water turned into a grueling physical ordeal in the biting, freezing gale. One careless movement at the icy, slippery edge of the shaft could lead to a fatal fall deep below. The water, brought into the cold house with such great effort, was often murky and scaldingly cold. In particularly dry years, the groundwater level dropped critically, and the wells practically dried up completely. At the very bottom, only a thick, dark sludge remained, which had to be laboriously scooped out drop by drop. The ill-advised location of the well next to the house eroded the foundation with constant leaks from overflowing buckets. The ground around the well quickly turned into an impassable, slippery swamp that almost never dried out. High humidity from the soil quickly transferred to the walls of the house, accelerating the deterioration of all wooden structural elements. In winter, this vast swamp froze, creating a continuous, incredibly slippery, and dangerous sheet of ice around the house. Safe access to one's own source of life was severely hampered for most of the harsh year. Using well water to prepare hot food did not always fully solve the problem of contamination. Prolonged boiling eliminated some of the dangers, but greatly concentrated harmful heavy metal salts. Dishes prepared with such water often had an unpleasant metallic taste and a strange cloudy color. It was completely impossible to alter the chemical composition of the liquid through boiling under simple household conditions. People had to make do every day with whatever quality of water a particular source in the courtyard provided. The well, a symbol of life and independence, often concealed a destructive force in its dark depths. Water was essential for daily life, yet it could also be the cause of a slow decline in strength. Controlling its quality was completely impossible. All that remained was to rely on luck and natural underground filters. Every sip taken was a risk that medieval people were forced to accept unconditionally and meekly. A household water source was not so much a salvation as a constant and justified cause for deep anxiety. A medieval home without fire was completely unthinkable, but it was the open hearth that posed a tremendous threat. In a simple dwelling, there were no proper stone chimneys, and the fire was lit right in the center of the earthen floor. Acidic, thick smoke rose upward, accumulating under the roof and seeping very slowly through the thatch to the outside. The space above head height was constantly filled with a thick, suffocating gray cloud. The air inside the house was critically saturated with combustion byproducts and tiny solid particles of wood ash. Carbon monoxide, completely colorless and odorless, posed the most insidious and invisible danger. With a lack of oxygen or the use of very damp firewood, the logs began to smolder, releasing this deadly toxin in abundance. The concentration of the gas rose incredibly quickly in a closed, poorly ventilated room during long winter nights. Sleeping household members might simply not wake up, slowly and imperceptibly losing consciousness from severe oxygen deprivation. This silent, hidden threat was an everyday reality that left no visible traces of physical destruction. Using wet peat or low-quality coal instead of good firewood exacerbated the environmental disaster inside the house. Peat burned very slowly, constantly emitting a huge amount of heavy, yellowish smoke with a pungent, swampy odor. This heavy smoke crept low along the floor, causing people to choke severely even while sitting right by the fire. The air became unbearably thick and very bitter, irritating the mucous membranes with absolutely every breath. Ventilating the cramped room of such heavy, thick smog was an incredibly difficult and time-consuming task. An open fire in the very center of a cramped room required constant and extremely vigilant supervision by the residents. A sudden gust of strong wind from an open door could scatter the red-hot embers across the entire floor. The dry, old straw used as a floor covering would burst into flames at the slightest spark almost instantly. A careless, sudden movement near the unguarded flame often led to very serious burns and injuries to the limbs. The safety of the entire house depended on the constant vigilance and alertness of the person tending the life-saving fire. Attempts to quickly vent the acrid smoke through small openings in the walls or roof inevitably led to enormous heat loss. The tiny wooden windows were thrown wide open to let the smoke out, but precious heat escaped along with it. In winter, this process became an agonizing choice between warm, smoky suffocation and the biting, piercing cold. Cooking hot food over an open fire always carried the risk of toppling over huge, heavy pots of boiling water. The simple wrought iron suspension mechanisms weakened significantly from constant heating and sudden temperature changes. A rusty hook could snap at any moment, spilling liters of boiling soup right into the hot ashes. A cloud of searing, thick steam and embers flying in all directions caused serious injury to anyone standing nearby. The area around the blazing hearth always remained a zone of maximum risk and extreme concentration. Moisture from the boiling cauldrons constantly mixed with the smoke, forming acrid, heavy steam that soaked through clothes and hair. Condensation settled thickly on the cold earthen walls, mixing with soot to form dirty, slippery black streaks. The house was constantly in a state of high humidity, which contributed to the incredibly rapid deterioration of the wooden supports. Drying thick, wet clothes by the fire often led to them smoldering and the fabric being permanently ruined. The heat was extremely uneven, scorching the face while leaving the back in the piercing winter cold. The hearth was the pulsating, fiery heart of the house, giving off warmth but demanding clean, breathable air in return. Life near a large open fire was a constant, exhausting struggle just to breathe deeply. The smoke penetrated deep into every pore of the fragile structure, becoming an integral part of the atmosphere of medieval life. Toxic, heavy gases and constant, volatile soot slowly eroded the health of absolutely every inhabitant, without exception. This life-saving source of heat always remained an extremely dual and incredibly dangerous element within the walls. The top spot in our ranking of absolute threats is unquestionably held by an uncontrollable and all-consuming sudden fire. Old wooden frames, thatched roofs, and an abundance of dry materials turned any house into a perfect powder keg. The ravenous flames spread through such a structure at incredible speed, leaving absolutely no time to think. All it took was a single candle knocked over by accident for the hard work of generations to turn into a pile of ashes. Fire was the most terrifying nightmare, capable of wiping a home off the face of the earth in a matter of minutes. The dense clustering of wooden buildings in towns and villages made fire a massive threat to the entire settlement. Bright sparks, carried by strong winds, flew from one dry thatched roof to another over vast distances. The hot, dense air ignited the dry wood of neighboring buildings, even without direct contact with the flames. It was practically impossible for the panicking residents to protect a wooden town from such a terrifying chain reaction. A fiery tornado destroyed entire densely populated neighborhoods, leaving behind only black, smoking, scorched wastelands. The storage of flammable household liquids, such as oil or grease, created additional sources of very intense combustion. During a major fire, these valuable supplies would explode, spraying burning droplets throughout the entire area of the room engulfed in flames. Wooden beams, dried out by the frost, caught fire much more quickly than during the autumn months of high humidity and dampness. Frozen wells and ice-covered rivers completely deprived people of the ability to quickly draw water for emergency firefighting. Frost and fire formed a deadly alliance, leaving those living on the streets without warm winter clothing. During a fire, open windows and doors created an incredibly strong draft that fanned the flames. Opening the front door in a desperate attempt to save belongings often resulted in a sudden burst of a massive fireball shooting out. The wooden staircase caught fire almost instantly, completely cutting off the only escape route for those upstairs. Jumping from a narrow window opening remained the only, albeit extremely dangerous, chance for a happy escape. The architecture of a wooden house always became the main trap in moments of extreme fire danger and panic. Reconstruction after a fire required enormous building resources, which ordinary peasants often simply did not have. The fire mercilessly destroyed not only the walls, but also winter food supplies, tools, and valuable household items. The loss of a warm home in the harsh European climate meant absolute poverty and the necessity of starting life anew. It took an incredibly long time to clear away the charred, smoldering remains of the foundation before laying the foundation for a new, sturdy structure. The shadow of a fiery catastrophe hung heavily over every household as a constant, grim reminder of the fragility of existence. Even wealthy stone houses were not completely protected from fire due to the abundance of wooden ceilings inside. The fire raged fiercely within the stone shell, melting the lead window frames and expensive stained glass windows. The heat was so intense that the massive stonework cracked and crumbled under its own immense weight. Restoring such a burned-out mansion was no less difficult than rebuilding a simple burned-down wooden hut from scratch. Fire was the ultimate universal equalizer, sparing neither poor huts nor the richest castles. Fire majestically concludes our ranking of the invisible and obvious threats of everyday life in a harsh medieval dwelling. It crowned absolutely all architectural mistakes, cost-cutting on materials, and the severity of historical weather conditions. This element was always the pinnacle of danger, capable of instantly undoing any titanic efforts at survival. The house, which was supposed to provide reliable protection, ultimately always became the most terrifying fuel for the elements. Sparks above the thatched roof were a constant reminder that home safety was merely a temporary illusion. Let us know in the comments what other topics related to historical survival and daily life you'd like to see in our upcoming videos. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new in-depth explorations of the amazing mysteries of the past.